Baruch Adonai Eloheinu shehakol niv'oreh. L'chaim l'chaim l'bracha. Welcome, folks, as we continue the Maimer, the Hasidic discourse, Basi Lagani. So we want to understand there's three dimensions, if you will, in what we experience in life, what we learn, especially if it's coming from a master teacher. You internalize that which you can internalize of teachings. Let's use it as a metaphor of a teacher to a student. Then the teacher gives something that's beyond the student that with time they will internalize. And then there's things that are inherently closed, hidden. And that's something even greater. That's all a metaphor of a metaphor. And we're going to have metaphor upon metaphor, we'll see. In order to understand that every Jew who is part of God's army, every Jew is to fight the battle of darkness, to change the world for good. We're equipped from on high with the various, if you will, ammunition, right? To use a metaphor. Again, a metaphor. I'm going to learn more about that. So, let's understand further. So there is an intelligence that you can explain to another, that is more evolved. And then there's an intelligence that's, younger age, childish, needs more explanation, more words to expound, which is the distinction between the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Mishnah, written by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the 2nd century, was very, very much concise. As a matter of fact, many pages of the Gemara, which the two make up the Talmud, by the way, explains the Mishnah at greater length. Now, the men of the Mishnah, they didn't need the greater length of explanation because they were greater individuals, loftier understanding, that it was sufficient to say everything in short form. They understood the elongated understanding of the Mishnah, which is then written down in the Gemara. Came generations afterwards. The intelligence was not as great. The understanding was not as great of the men of the Gemara as opposed to the men of the Mishnah. And therefore they needed more words to explain the same thing. Right. But then so that's all, more or less, shall we say, right? More understanding of greater minds, less explanation. the um, the short form, if you will, is sufficient. Less understanding, you need more explanation, right? However, there's also an intelligence that itself is hidden, and that's also given over. Therefore, in order to reveal it, right, it's an intelligence, and you want to share that intelligence. So how are you going to share that intelligence? Well, it's going to be in a hidden way. It's not going to come because you explain more. No, explain more is just more words that is revealing, as words reveal, right? We're learning now in Tanya, right? God's word reveals. Reveals him. So any word of a person reveals who, right? But then there's an intelligence that the words, it's not more words, because it's a hidden intelligence. So therefore the way it's given over is hidden. And it's not like, say more words, more explanation. No. So how do you give over that intelligence? Well, that's what's called a metaphor. That's what's called a riddle. They're not an explanation of the thing itself, right? The riddle isn't an explanation. The metaphor is not an explanation of something, right, that gives more understanding, right? Right, and that's what we say. To what is this idea that we're talking about, right? To what is it similar to? So it's an extraneous thing that is not inherently connected to, or I would say inherently, maybe inherently it is connected, but it doesn't seem to be connected to the intelligence. And you give a metaphor. Right? Good morning. Only through the metaphor can you get it. Now, it may not be that one metaphor is sufficient. Sometimes you need a metaphor upon a metaphor to bring it out. Sometimes you need many. As a matter of fact, King Solomon, he used 3,000 metaphors to bring out an idea. So imagine you don't get it in the first metaphor, so you need a metaphor to explain the first one. Then you need, okay, you're not quite getting it on the second metaphor, so you need a third one to explain the second one, and all the way down. So you can imagine, after 3,000 metaphors, how far removed is that from the original metaphor? Which the metaphor itself is not about the idea itself. It's a outside element, outside, if you will, explanation that's not of the concept or the idea that needs greater understanding. Is that idea clear? Yeah? Okay, good. Thank you. Now, so King Solomon, by him, the idea was so the wisest of all men. So therefore, the idea that he had was so um, deep, so profound, so hidden that he had the capacity to bring it down with 3,000 metaphors. The Talmud tells us of Rabbi Meir, who also, he could bring only 300 metaphors. And that was of a fox. He had 300 metaphors of a fox. As the Talmud tells us, we only have 3. In other words, the more metaphors you bring to metaphor upon metaphor upon metaphor, right? A metaphor to explain the metaphor, another one to, right? That just shows how hidden the teachings is. So by King Solomon, it was so hidden, the intelligence, the idea, the concept, that it took 3,000 metaphors to bring it out. Their mayor and Talmud, he had 300 he was capable of. And we're capable of 3, Talmud tells us. There's another way to understand this, what we were talking about. Now, again, what we're trying to bring across over here is that God is giving us something in our lives that is an infinite light, that is, and light means revelation, but it's unrevealed. It's inherently closed. It's hidden. It's not like we're going to come to it, right? That's the light that comes down so far, right? That is now still hovering beyond us, but we're capable of getting there. This light, no, it's not direct. Another way to appreciate this is, I think we spoke about this, is the stories of the Torah. Right? Stories of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. The patriarchs and the matriarchs. We just see it as a story, right? But the story is really the external. It's like it's a metaphor. Now, is the story a true story? Absolutely. That's Chumash Rashi. When we learn Chumash Rashi, right, we're taking it in a literal sense, and we have to understand it literally. If you were to understand a loved one only literally, how much do you understand of them? Very little. Because there's deeper things about the person. Hidden messages, right? Deeper expounded messages. Mystical, esoteric part of the individual, right? Why is that? Because we're created in the image of God, and that's the way the Torah is too, right? So for us to understand a message from another person, it's not enough what you just hear literally from them. There's body language that hints to something. There's deeper things, mystical things, right? So likewise here, when we're talking about Torah and the stories of the Torah, we can just take it literally. And most of us do. That aspect of the Torah is the external aspect of it. It's like a metaphor. As a metaphor is external, right? Like when you give a metaphor, it has nothing apparently connected to the idea. It's its own thing, right? When you're explaining an idea, so then the idea you're just expounding upon it, or if someone doesn't need such an expounding explanation, right? More words, more thoughts about it, less or more, right? It's of the idea itself. But a metaphor is completely nothing to do with the idea connected to it, because the metaphor is its own thing. So it's external in that sense. So likewise, the storyline in the Torah is the external component. It's like a metaphor. As a matter of fact, it's called, Torah is called Mashal HaKadmoni, the original metaphor. The first one. Right? As opposed to laws in the Torah they're not a metaphor. That's like, I mean, they're not a metaphor, because they're precise teachings to tell me how to lead my life. God's wisdom, God's will. In a story, where's God's wisdom and where's his will? It's hidden in the story. Now, why would that be exactly? Why make the inner meaning of it so distant? Now, again, I want to emphasize that we need to learn Torah on that literal level, and we do that every day, Chumash and Rashi, right? So it's important to appreciate it on that level, but we should never think, oh, I get it. No, there's much more. There's the hinted meaning, remez. There's homiletics, drush, right? The expounded meaning. There's the sod, which means the hidden meaning, which is the mystical meaning. And then there's Chassidus, of course, which is beyond and connects all those four different levels together, which is what we're learning now. Okay, so what we have here is the idea of metaphor that hides in it a wisdom. We have Torah's stories that hides in it divine wisdom, divine will. And therefore the stories are considered like a metaphor. Now, what's the point in that? What's the point to make, a part of the Torah so hidden, so removed? I just, spill it out. Well, where are we going? Like, what's the point over here? What's God doing? Just be more clear to me. Like Jewish law. Tell me what I gotta do. So you learn Rambam, right? You learn Jewish law. You get the parameters of the do's and the don'ts. And hey, life's simple. You tell me this story, that in this story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, this deep, hidden sofa, and it's so deep that sometimes it's a metaphor, and I got to go 3,000 layers below to get the hidden message. By the hidden message is not the medrash that sometimes Rashi even brings in. I'm talking about much more profound and deeper. Well, profound and deeper is the right word, but deeper. Yeah, I guess profound. Digging deeper and deeper and deeper. I'm like, just give it to me. Just, So now we're going to have to wait we'll learn in tomorrow, based on the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. Fascinating idea. Okay, more to come. Thank you, folks.